The text arrived at exactly 1:47 p.m., just as Margaret was lifting a forkful of her mother-in-law's famous lasagna to her mouth. The vibration against her thigh made her pause, but she didn't reach for her phone immediately. The Castellanos took their Sunday lunches seriously. Phones stayed silent, conversations flowed freely, and family came first. It was one of the many traditions that had drawn Sarah to Marco in the first place, 3 years ago when they'd first started dating. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Sarah, dear, you must try more of the garlic bread, Rosa Castellano insisted, her weathered hands already reaching across the mahogany table to load another piece onto Sarah's plate. You're too skinny. Marco, tell your wife she needs to eat more. Marco grinned, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that had first made Sarah's heart skip. Mama, leave her alone. Sarah eats plenty. He reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand, his wedding ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the dining room windows. The phone buzzed again. This time, Sarah couldn't ignore it entirely. Something about the persistence felt urgent. She glanced apologetically around the table. Rosa and Vincent, Marco's parents, his sister Elena with her husband David, and their twin 7-year-old boys who were currently engaged in a silent war involving carefully aimed peas. Excuse me, Sarah murmured, reaching into her purse. I just want to make sure it's not work. Rosa's expression soured slightly. On Sunday? What kind of place makes people work on Sunday? It's probably nothing, Mama, Marco said. But Sarah noticed he was watching her with unusual intensity. Sarah glanced at her phone screen and froze. Unknown number. Don't react. They're recording you. Her breath caught in her throat. The message was followed immediately by another. Unknown number. Check her laptop. Video file on desktop. They've been planning this for weeks. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she set the phone face down on the table. Around her, the familiar sounds of family dinner continued. Elena laughing at something David said. The twins arguing over who got the last meatball. Vincent launching into another story about his days working construction in Brooklyn. But it all felt suddenly distant, like she was hearing it through water. Everything okay, honey? Marco asked, his voice carrying just the right note of concern. Fine, Sarah managed. Just work stuff. She forced herself to take another bite of lasagna, though it now tasted like cardboard in her mouth. Her mind was racing. Who would send her a message like that? And what did they mean about recording her? About her laptop? The third message arrived 10 minutes later, just as Rosa was serving tiramisu. Unknown number. The camera's been active for 3 weeks. Check the browser history. Look at sharedsecrets.com. They uploaded everything. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Butterfingers, she said quickly, forcing a laugh as she bent to retrieve it. But her mind was spinning. 3 weeks ago was right around the time Marco had borrowed her laptop to update his resume. He'd said his computer was acting up, and she'd thought nothing of it. They shared everything, or so she'd believed. You sure you're okay? Elena asked, leaning forward with genuine concern. You look a little pale. I think I might be coming down with something, Sarah said. It wasn't entirely a lie. She felt nauseous, though not from any virus. Maybe I should head home early. Nonsense, Rosa declared. A little fresh air, that's what you need. Marco, take your wife for a walk around the block. Marco was already standing, his hand on Sarah's shoulder. Come on, babe. Some air will do you good. As they walked down the tree-lined street of Marco's childhood neighborhood, Sarah's phone buzzed twice more. She waited until they were out of sight of the house before checking the messages. Unknown number. Video title, Watch My Wife's Secret Breakdown. She thinks nobody knows about the pills. Unknown number. 47 comments so far. Someone recognized you from your work profile. Sarah stopped walking so abruptly that Marco nearly collided with her. What's wrong? He asked, but there was something in his voice, a note she'd never heard before. Was it guilt? Or was she just paranoid now? The pills. God, the pills. 6 months ago, Sarah had been diagnosed with severe anxiety and depression. The medications helped, but she'd been ashamed, keeping it secret from everyone except Marco. She'd trusted him completely, breaking down in their kitchen one night, sobbing about how broken she felt, how terrified she was that people would judge her if they knew. Marco had held her, promised her that her secret was safe, that he'd never tell anyone. And now someone was telling her it was online for the world to see. I need to go home, she said quietly. But we haven't had coffee yet. Mama made her special. Now, Marco. Her voice cut through his protests like a blade. The drive home was silent. Sarah stared out the passenger window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass, while her phone continued to buzz with messages from the unknown number. She didn't read them. She couldn't bear to know what else they contained. Their apartment was a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that had seemed so chic when they'd moved in together last year. Now it felt like a museum of her own betrayal. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever feel safe again. Sarah went straight to her laptop, which sat on the dining table where she'd left it that morning. Her hands shook as she opened it and navigated to the desktop. There it was, a video file she'd never seen before, labeled with yesterday's date. She clicked play. The video opened with a wide shot of their living room, taken from the laptop's webcam. She could see herself sitting on the couch, still in her pajamas, talking on the phone to her therapist. The audio was crystal clear, too clear. Every word of her private session was audible. Her fears about her mother's recent cancer diagnosis, her struggles with the medication side effects, her terror that Marco's family would discover her mental health issues and think less of her. The video was 23 minutes long. Sarah slammed the laptop shut and ran to the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before she vomited. When she emerged, Marco was standing in the hallway, his expression carefully neutral. Feel better? He asked. Did you know? The words came out as barely a whisper. Know what? Sarah looked at her husband, really looked at him. The man she'd fallen in love with? The man she'd married 8 months ago in a ceremony at his family's church. The man she'd trusted with her deepest vulnerabilities. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile as charming as ever. But there was something cold in his eyes that she'd never noticed before. About the video, she said. Marco's facade cracked for just a moment, a flicker of something that might have been panic before his expression smoothed out again. What video? The one of me talking to my therapist, the one that's been online for 3 weeks. Sarah, you're not making sense. Maybe you should lie down. Don't. Her voice was steady now, filled with a fury she didn't know she possessed. Don't you dare gaslight me. I know what I saw. Marco's shoulders sagged slightly. How did you find out? The simple admission hit her like a physical blow. She'd been hoping, desperately, that there was some other explanation, that someone had hacked into her computer without his knowledge, that he was as much a victim as she was. But no. He'd known. He'd participated. Why? She whispered. Marco ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing. It wasn't supposed to go this far. It started as a joke, you know, just sharing funny stories with some guys online. They have this forum where they post about their wives and girlfriends and… Funny stories? Sarah's voice rose to a shout. You think my mental breakdown was funny? No. No, of course not. But the guys, they were sharing these videos of their wives having meltdowns, and they dared me to… Look, I never meant for it to get this big. The comments, the shares, it just exploded. Sarah stared at him. This stranger wearing her husband's face. You sold me for internet points. It wasn't like that. Get out. Sarah, please, let me explain. Get out. Marco left finally, claiming he was going back to his parents' house to give her space to cool down. As soon as the door closed behind him, Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Sarah? This is Elena, Marco's sister. Sarah's blood went cold. Elena? How did you— I sent you the texts. Elena's voice was tight with anger. I've been trying to get the courage to tell you for weeks. I found out by accident when I borrowed David's laptop. He's part of their little group too. They call themselves the Reality Check Brotherhood. David too? Sarah sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. 12 guys total. They've all been secretly recording their wives and girlfriends and posting the videos online. They rate them, comment on them, share them in other forums. Sarah, there are thousands of people who have seen you at your most vulnerable moment. The room spun around Sarah. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I was trying to figure out how to approach you without destroying my marriage, but when I saw how happy you were at dinner today, how much you trusted Marco— Elena's voice broke. I couldn't let it continue. You deserve to know. After Elena hung up, Sarah sat in the silence of her apartment and let the full magnitude of her situation wash over her. Her most private moment had been commodified, shared, laughed at by strangers. Her husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect her, had been the orchestrator of her humiliation. But as the initial shock began to fade, something else took its place: cold, calculating rage. Sarah opened her laptop and navigated to sharedsecrets.com. Creating an account was simple. They welcomed new users with enthusiasm. The site was exactly what Elena had described: a forum for men to share reality content, featuring the women in their lives. There were categories for everything: bathroom breakdowns, crying sessions, secret addictions, mental health meltdowns. Her video was in the mental health meltdown section, titled, Crazy Wife Thinks She's Broken LOL. It had 47,291 views and 1,200 comments. The top comment, posted by someone with the username Marcos Polo, read, "This is what happens when you marry damaged goods. Should have seen the red flags. Marcos Polo." Her husband's username was a play on his name and their honeymoon in the Greek islands. Sarah screenshotted everything. Over the next hour, she methodically documented the entire site. She found videos of Elena and David's neighbors, women from their church, colleagues' wives. The men shared personal information freely: full names, addresses, where their wives worked. They'd built an entire ecosystem of exploitation and humiliation, all hidden behind usernames and private forum access. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd gotten sloppy about operational security. Sarah had majored in computer science before switching to marketing. More importantly, she'd spent the last 2 years working for a cybersecurity firm, helping clients protect their digital assets from exactly this kind of violation. She knew how to trace IP addresses, how to cross-reference usernames with social media profiles, how to build a comprehensive picture of digital identity. By midnight, she had real names and addresses for all 12 members of the Reality Check Brotherhood. She had screenshots of their conversations planning these recordings. She had evidence of them coaching each other on how to secretly install recording software. She had proof of them sharing personal information about their victims. Most importantly, she had a plan. Sarah started with the wives. Using carefully crafted anonymous messages, she reached out to each of the 11 other women whose privacy had been violated. She sent them screenshots of their husbands' posts, links to their videos, evidence of the broader conspiracy. She watched in real time as marriages imploded across the city. Elena was the first to respond, calling her in tears to thank her. "I confronted David an hour ago," she said. "He tried to deny it until I showed him the screenshots. Sarah, I had no idea how extensive this was. They were trading videos like baseball cards." Others followed. Michelle, whose husband had filmed her having a panic attack after her miscarriage. Jessica, whose boyfriend had recorded her struggling with an eating disorder. Carmen, whose husband had captured her breakdown when her teenage son was arrested for drug possession. One by one, the women left their men. But Sarah wasn't finished. The second phase of her plan required patience. She spent 3 days creating fake profiles on various social media platforms, building a network of seemingly unconnected accounts. She researched the men's employers, their friends, their extended families. She learned their patterns, their vulnerabilities, their pressure points. Marco tried to come home on Tuesday night. Sarah met him at the door with divorce papers and a suitcase containing his belongings. "This is insane," he said, standing in the hallway with his suitcase at his feet. "You're throwing away our marriage over one stupid mistake?" "One mistake?" Sarah's voice was deadly calm. "Marco, I've spent the last 3 days documenting your activities. This wasn't a mistake. This was a sustained campaign of exploitation. You've been violating my privacy for months. It wasn't just you. That's supposed to make me feel better? That you were exploiting other women too?" Marco's expression hardened. "You know what? Maybe this is for the best. I was getting tired of walking on eggshells around your mental problems anyway. The guys were right. I did marry damaged goods." Sarah smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Funny you should mention that," she said. "Because I have some good news. Your employer received an interesting package today." Marco's face went pale. "What package?" "Screenshots of all your posts on sharedsecrets.com, including the ones where you shared my personal information, my workplace, our address. Your boss seemed particularly interested in the post where you discussed secretly recording female colleagues during video conferences." "You didn't." "I did. I also sent copies to your mother, your father, Elena, your cousin Michael, your friend Tony from college, and that nice elderly couple next door to your parents who always ask about us at church." Sarah's smile widened. "Oh, and Channel 7 News. They're doing a segment on secret recording conspiracies tomorrow night. Apparently your story was too good to pass up." Marco lunged toward her, fury contorting his features, but Sarah was ready. She stepped back and held up her phone, which was actively recording. "Please do," she said. "Give me some content of my own to share." Marco stopped short, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "You vindictive bitch," he snarled. "You've ruined everything." "No, Marco. You ruined everything. I'm just making sure everyone knows who you really are." The third phase of Sarah's plan launched the following morning. She'd spent her career in marketing learning how to make content go viral, how to craft messages that people couldn't help but share. Now she applied those skills to a different kind of campaign. She created a website called The Reality Check Files and uploaded everything. Screenshots of the forum posts, evidence of the secret recordings, profiles of all 12 men involved, and resources for other women who might be experiencing similar violations. She crafted press releases and sent them to local news stations, women's advocacy groups, and cybersecurity bloggers. The story exploded. By Thursday, it was trending on social media. By Friday, 3 major news networks had picked it up. The phrase "reality check brotherhood" became synonymous with digital exploitation and marital betrayal. Support groups formed online for the victims. Legislators began discussing new laws about consent and digital privacy. Sarah found herself at the center of the storm, fielding interview requests and speaking invitations. She accepted some of them, carefully selected appearances where she could control the narrative and advocate for other victims. She declined others, particularly those that seemed more interested in salacious details than meaningful change. The men of the reality check brotherhood faced varying degrees of consequence. 3 lost their jobs immediately. 5 faced divorce proceedings. 2 were arrested on charges related to unauthorized surveillance and distribution of intimate images. David, Elena's husband, suffered a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized for 3 days. Marco tried to salvage his reputation through a carefully crafted public apology posted on social media, claiming he'd been led astray by bad influences and was deeply sorry for the pain he'd caused. The post received 847 replies. Sarah counted them personally. 846 were negative, and the one positive comment was from his mother. He lost his job at the consulting firm where he'd worked for 5 years. He was evicted from the apartment he'd rented after Sarah kicked him out, unable to make rent without his salary. His parents, devastated by the public humiliation and Rosa's discovery that several women from their church were among the victims, asked him not to visit until he'd gotten serious help. 6 weeks after Sarah had received that first anonymous text, she sat in her lawyer's office finalizing the divorce settlement. Marco had agreed to all her terms. He wasn't in a position to negotiate. He would pay for her therapy costs, surrender his claim to any jointly owned property, and agree to a restraining order preventing him from contacting her or coming within 500 feet of her home or workplace. "He looks like he's aged 10 years, her lawyer observed as they watched Marco sign the papers through the conference room window. Sarah felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Good. The aftermath of the reality check brotherhood scandal continued to ripple outward for months. Sarah used her unexpected platform to advocate for stronger digital privacy laws and support other victims of intimate partner surveillance. She left her job at the cybersecurity firm to launch a nonprofit organization focused on helping people who'd been victimized by secret recordings and digital exploitation. Elena became one of her first volunteers. She and David had divorced, but Elena had gained something unexpected from the experience: a sense of her own strength and a clear understanding of what she would and wouldn't tolerate in relationships. "I know this sounds strange," Elena said one evening as they worked together in Sarah's home office, now the headquarters of the nonprofit. "But I'm grateful. Not for what David did, but for the fact that I found out who he really was before I wasted any more years with him." Sarah looked up from the case file she was reviewing, a woman in Seattle whose husband had been live streaming her therapy sessions to his gaming buddies. "I understand completely." The anonymous text messages had stopped after that first day. Sarah never found out who had sent them initially, though she suspected it might have been Elena using a burner phone before she'd found the courage to reveal herself. It didn't matter. The messenger was less important than the message. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones betraying us most thoroughly. A year later, Sarah had testified before Congress about the need for stronger digital privacy protections. Her nonprofit had helped more than 200 women discover and document similar violations by intimate partners. She'd written a book about her experience that became a bestseller and donated the proceeds to organizations supporting domestic violence survivors. She never heard from Marco again directly, though she knew he'd moved to Portland and was working at a car dealership under his middle name. Elena reported that Rosa still cried when Sarah's name came up, mourning the daughter-in-law she'd lost because of her son's cruelty. Sarah had been working with a therapist, a different one now, who specialized in betrayal trauma and digital violations. The process was slow and sometimes painful, but she was healing. She'd learned to trust again, carefully and selectively. She'd even started dating, though she approached new relationships with a sophisticated understanding of privacy and consent that her younger self had never imagined needing. On the anniversary of that terrible Sunday lunch, Sarah found herself back in Brooklyn, not far from the Castellanos' old neighborhood. She hadn't planned to be there. She was visiting a client whose husband had been secretly recording her business calls and sharing proprietary information with competitors. But after the meeting, she found herself walking the familiar tree-lined streets. The house looked the same, though she noticed Rosa's flower boxes were less vibrant than they used to be. As she stood across the street, taking in the scene of what had once felt like familial warmth, her phone buzzed with a text message. For just a moment, her heart rate spiked, an involuntary response she was still working to overcome. But the message was from Elena, a photo of her new apartment in Manhattan, where she was preparing for a date with a man she'd met at a pottery class. Sarah smiled and typed back, "He looks nice. Trust your instincts." As she walked back to her car, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. A year ago, she'd thought she was living a fairy tale, married to a charming man from a warm, loving family, building a future together based on mutual trust and respect. The discovery of Marco's betrayal had shattered that reality completely. But what she'd built in its place was something different and, in many ways, better. A life grounded in authentic relationships, meaningful work, and a clear understanding of her own worth. She'd learned that the most devastating betrayals could be transformed into the most empowering victories, but only if you were willing to stop being a victim and start being an architect of consequences. The revenge she'd taken against Marco and his conspirators hadn't just been about punishment. It had been about reclaiming her agency, protecting other women, and ensuring that the men who'd treated their intimate partners as content to be consumed faced real consequences for their actions. As Sarah drove home to her new apartment, one she'd chosen entirely based on her own preferences, with security systems she'd installed and controlled, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with her choices and absolute confidence in her ability to protect herself. The unknown number had texted her to warn her about being recorded. But in the end, Sarah had become the one controlling the narrative, deciding what story got told and how it ended. And this time, the ending was justice.